Hi, I'm Miss Stockton. Welcome to cooking. Before we start cooking today, there's a few things to keep in mind. Number one, you definitely want to put your hair back if you have long hair. You want to have some sort of covering for your clothes, like an apron. And then, of course, you always want to remember to wash your hands. And it's recommended for 20 seconds hand washing with soap. So get that, get some soap on there. Get in between your fingers, sing the ABC song. Nice and then get your wrists and all that. You can get the handle of your sink. Rinse off really well. Under the running water, a little more rubbing. And then of course you always want to dry your hands well as well. So today, it's important that you know how to read a recipe. Normally we do this in class. A few things to keep in mind. Number one, recipes are formulas and instructions. There you can see on the recipe behind me that you have a certain number of ingredients and you have a certain process that you should go through when you're cooking. You always want to read through your recipe first to make sure that you have all the ingredients on hand. Make sure you understand all the cooking terms and directions, and you want to allow enough time to make your recipe because you don't want to run out of time and then have time to go to bed and your cookies are just going into the oven. You want to follow instructions exactly. You want to measure accurately, and you want to complete each of the steps in order as they come, because that might make a big difference on some recipes. Most of the recipes we'll be making throughout this cooking class are focused around different types of leaveners, what makes things rise. Today, we'll be using eggs and steam to make our popovers rise. We'll also learn about baking powder, baking soda, and yeast, as well as we'll do some other recipes that will teach you different kinds of knife skills and related skills. Hopefully, they'll be delicious and you'll enjoy them. So when I was talking about recipes being formulas and instructions for food products, a lot of what makes up a recipe is actually science. It's pretty interesting. And in the popover recipe, I'm going to read from this book, The Inquisitive Cook. Egg proteins and starch from the small amount of flour in the batter form a cohesive but delicate, easily lifted framework. The power for lifting this framework comes from the steam that's generated by the evaporating liquid. When liquid turns to water vapor, it expands to more than 1,400 times its original volume. The top pops up with ease and the steam lifts the partially baked batter. Just so you know, as you see behind me, a metal pan will conduct heat better than a glass pan. So that was something to keep in mind. And also you want to make sure that you put your popovers into a fully preheated oven, because that will help the sides cook better and you'll get a better product and more steam will be created with a fully hot oven. So those are the things that I suggest you do before you start cooking today, the science of popovers. So first step is to preheat your oven. On my oven, I turn it to bake and then I push the plus until I get to the desired heat. In this case, it's going to start at 450 degrees. We're going to turn it down halfway through this recipe, but it's preheating now, and hopefully when it gets to 450 degrees, we'll be ready to put our popovers into the oven. All right, so making your popovers, you want to take a look at your recipe, either take a screenshot or use the recipe that I posted for you. The first thing you're going to need is 1 cup of milk. When you measure milk or any liquid, you should use a liquid measuring cup, one that you can see through. That will help you to get a more precise measurement. So you're going to go up to your 1 cup, you're going to look at it at eye level. That way you can make sure that you have a level cup. Then you're going to need 1 cup of flour for this recipe, and for the flour, any dry ingredient, you're going to want to use dry ingredient measuring cups. We need a cup here, so I'm going to scoop into my dry measuring cup. In the United States, we use measuring tools, cups, and spoons. In Europe, they weigh everything, so if you get a European cookbook, in fact, most places on the planet weigh their ingredients. It's a little bit more precise. In the United States, we measure. Our cookbooks are made that way, so that's something to keep in mind. You want to use, again, the dry measuring cup for your flour. Then you're going to need to have 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And so I have some salt here. Now with tablespoons and teaspoons, you're going to see a capital T and you're going to see a lowercase t. Capital T stands for tablespoon, lowercase t stands for teaspoon. You can remember because a table is bigger than a cup of tea. Capital T, lowercase t. For our salt, we only need a 1/4 cup, or 1/4 teaspoon, not a 1/4 cup, that would be awful. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So I'm measuring over something else, then I'm getting a level teaspoon, and I'm just going to put that into a different measuring cup for right now. The last thing you're going to need for today, actually second to last, are 3 eggs. You're going to use 3 eggs. Sometimes it's nice to have all these ingredients at room temperature. It's not crucial for this recipe, but having things at room temperature typically gives you a better product. The last thing you're going to need for this recipe is a tablespoon of melted butter. So butter typically comes in cubes, and there are 8 tablespoons in 1 cube. There's usually measurements on the cube so you can know where to measure. So I'm going to cut off 1 tablespoon here at the end, and then I'm going to put it into a glass device. You don't want to put plastic into the microwave or anything, or metal. You want to use glass or porcelain. Put that right into the microwave, maybe 20 seconds. See if that'll melt. All right, so now that we've preheated our oven and got all of our ingredients together, the next thing you want to do is to spray your tin that you're going to use to cook your popovers. You have a couple choices. This is actually a popover tin made just for popovers so that the air can circulate in between the popovers. It's sort of an ideal sort of thing. Also good is your traditional muffin tin. This will work just as well. So anyone that you have there at your house would be great to use. You're gonna wanna take some cooking spray, and I usually do this over the sink because that way no one could get into it and spill, and you wanna slip, not spill, but slip. You wanna spray each of these, get the sides as well so nothing is gonna stick later. Then you're gonna wanna get a medium bowl, and for this recipe I actually use a whisk. And you're going to mix the following ingredients until smooth. Excuse me. Your cup of flour, make sure that all of that gets out of there. Your cup of milk, your 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to sprinkle that all around so it doesn't get one big clump of salt. Your tablespoon of melted butter, and you're going to go ahead and mix that really well. Most recipes we'll be making later, we won't mix really well. We're actually mixing a lot and changing the chemical composition of the flour in such a way that it's going to be forming these long polymer strands. So it's going to be a little bit more chewy than, say, a muffin would be. What you're going to do with the eggs is you're going to go ahead and add them to the batter one at a time, mixing well after each egg. Incidentally, breaking that egg on the counter will generally work a little better for you than trying to break it on the edge of the bowl. Not sure where I read that, but it seems to generally be true. Alright, so you get all that mixed in really nicely. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your prepared pan and you're going to go ahead and get your batter into the prepared pan. I like to take a dry measuring cup and use that to help me put the batter in. I'm about 3/4 full, half to 3/4. Alright, I'm just filling up my last one here. It looks like they're about a half full. So even your muffin tins might be closer to a half than 3/4 full. One thing I like to do before I put these into the oven, so I've got any little spills, I like to take a clean dish towel and just wipe up the spills on the sides. This makes the cleanup later after they come out of the oven so much easier. What you're going to do at this point, in your hot 450-degree oven, you're going to pop these into the oven as quickly as you can. I'm making sure that you use your hot pads and so you don't lose heat, because a hot oven is a good oven for popovers. All right, my oven is preheated to its 450 degrees, so I'm going to pop my popovers into the oven. It's important that you remember to pull out the tray first, as versus to just pushing your popovers in. So I'm going to go ahead and put my popovers in here. They fit right in. Put in the tray, close up the oven. Try not to let as much heat escape as possible. Keep that heat inside the oven. After these bake for 15 minutes, I'm going to actually turn the oven down to 350 degrees without peaking. Turn it down to 350 degrees and let them cook for an additional 15 minutes. Make sure you set your timer for 15 minutes. After 30 minutes of total cooking time, you will need to pierce the top of each popover with a fork. You'll need to cook for an additional 5 minutes to cook the inside of the popover. When they come out of the oven, they'll often have a hole in the center of the bottom. Here's the top of the popover, here's the bottom of the popover, and you can go ahead and fill up that with some jam or some spread or whatever meets your fancy. And then of course you want to do this. Enjoy. I hope that you enjoyed your first popover recipe.